Welcome to the Heartification podcast, where I interview people on how art has affected their lives and what it means to them. Art has a very special place in my life. It not only makes me feel happy, but it allows me to make others feel special. This podcast is all about how art has made an impact on others' lives, for all ages, all backgrounds, and all walks of life. You can find more about this podcast guest in my show notes. Without further ado, let's welcome my next guest. He is an award-winning photographer, author, entrepreneur, podcast host, and speaker. Please welcome my next guest, James Patrick.
How are you doing? Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on my podcast. So the first question I always ask is, how do you define art?
I've been thinking a lot about really that definition of art because it's so subjective. And the more I started thinking about, because the first thought that comes to mind is, well, art is storytelling. And, as artists, we have a bevy of different mediums that we can choose to craft and communicate our stories, whether it's, like myself through photographs or through written word or through painting or clay or spoken word or music. There's all these different mediums in which to tell a story. And the more I started thinking about the more I realized that the subjectivity of art is what makes art. It's that choice of, this is art and I'm choosing this to be my art, or I'm choosing this to be my method, or the manner of which I want to communicate with the world. So the more I thought about that, the more I realized that art, the definition for me would be, it's a choice. It's a choice that we can choose to participate in.
Yeah, definitely, totally agree. And my definition is any way you're able to express yourself. And that can be anything you choose, just as you said. And when I used to think of art when I was little, it would just be like painting, coloring, sculpting, dancing. But if you actually think about it and go through my definition of, it's any way you're able to express yourself, anything can be an art.
100%. I'm even glad that you brought up dancing too, because that's another, it's a way to communicate and or express yourself through movement. So not even auditory, which is such a, or visual, it's more visual, but it's so fascinating that, we as artists, and I'll use that word artist, we as artists can choose how we want to express ourselves, whether it's express ourselves to others or just express ourselves for the sake of expressing ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And what art forms are you exposed to?
So for me, I tend to kind of bounce around a lot in regards to different art forms. There are certain things I gravitate towards. As a photographer, I love looking at the work of other photographers, but I actually am I guess careful's the right word. I'm careful not to look at the work of contemporaries in my field. So I might not look at someone who'd be a competitor of mine, because I might look at it with the wrong set of eyes, if that makes sense. I might not look at it with appreciation. I might look at them like, oh, why am I not making something very similar? So I might look at photographers in other industries or other genres. But I'm a voracious reader. I read at least a book a week. So I'm always kind of plowing through written material. I love cinema. So I'm always kind of diving through movies. I absolutely am obsessed with music. One of my favorite jobs I ever had was I managed a record store when I was in college. I'm still obsessed with recorded music. So yeah, I guess it depends on the day, but I'm one of those individuals where I'm always consuming something, whether it's, video or audio or written word. I'm always in a consumption mode.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that. And I think it's important, as I said, my definition is art is anything you're able to express yourself. And I think it's important to be surrounded by art, because you don't want to keep all your feelings all locked up. You want to let them out some way. And you don't have to do that by just talking to someone. You can do that by painting or writing a song or dancing. There's so many ways that you can just express yourself. So I think it's important to at least maybe daily just express yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I like that it's a balance between what you're consuming and also what you're creating and or producing. I mean, even doing a podcast like this can be considered a form of expression or art where two people get together just to have a conversation and relay ideas off one another. So we're in this creation modality, and then the people who get to listen or download this podcast, they're in that consumption space. But here's what's so cool about that: someone might hear something on this show that gives them that spark or that inspiration, and all of a sudden they're like, "Ooh, what if I?" And it's that what if question that could lead into so many possibilities. And I love when like connections like that happen.
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty amazing. And do you consider photography to be an art form? And if so, why?
For the longest time, I would answer no to that, only because I thought art had a certain threshold of maybe like qualifications. Like I can't call myself an artist unless I've done a certain, I take photos for magazines, but I'm not in a gallery. Or I shoot ad campaigns, but I'm not, no one's purchasing my work to put it up in their home. Like there was a certain dividing line between what constitutes as artistic or art versus what is done. Maybe another version would be commerce. I was like, well, I'm on the commerce side. I'm getting hired. I'm being commissioned to do these projects. So by that definition, it could this could not be art. And that was a very limited scope that I had on photography. And for the longest time, I'll be honest, I didn't even want to call myself a photographer, because even that label, being a photographer, I felt carried too much responsibility or weight to it. And so, when people would say early on in my career, and people would say, "What do you do for a living?" I would honestly say my full-time job, which at the time was marketing. It's like, oh, I work in marketing, because that's not going to yield a lot more questions. But when you say I'm a photographer, or I'm a writer, or I'm a podcaster, or I'm a producer, or I film videos, now it's going to open up all these other questions. So early in my career, I was afraid to answer those questions because I was unsure of myself, my abilities to own that title. But now I can look at my career and says, yeah, no, I consider photography a form of art, a form of storytelling. When I do public speaking, that is a form of art. That's a form of storytelling. When I write my books or my blogs, it's the same thing. All of it is art. And I look at that is a choice that we have to choose to identify as an artist. So now, yeah, I choose to identify as an artist and create art in a myriad of different mediums, where before I was afraid to. And that brings up that imposter syndrome. Like, if I say that I'm involved in this, or I do this kind of work, that someone might judge me or say I don't have the right to do it. But I've redefined imposter syndrome. My belief in imposter syndrome now is that we are all imposters. And what I mean by that is I had no idea how to be a photographer when I picked up a camera. No clue. So I was an imposter, but I was figuring it out. I had no idea how to be a podcast host until I sat down and started recording podcasts. So at that time, I was an imposter. I had no idea how to be an author until I sat down to write a book and it became a bestseller. Everything we do, we should own this embodiment of being an imposter, because being an imposter is not a negative thing. It means we're figuring things out. And everyone loves to figure things out. So, redefining that has helped me look at things like my photography or my speaking or my podcasting or writing as, yeah, no, I identify as an artist. This is my art form. This is how I'm choosing to communicate, or as you say, to express oneself.
Yeah, I love that. And I liked how you talked about, like the divider between you thinking you're not an artist or identifying yourself as a photographer, which we shouldn't do because everything is art. And I think sometimes society will kind of put that pressure on you saying if you're an artist or not. If it's different or weird, it's not art. If it's not one of the main arts, like visual arts or dancing or anything, it's not an art.
We spend so much time worrying about, and I'm guilty of this too, worrying about what others think about or feel about or have to say about the work we're doing. And something was said to me a number of years ago, and it's stuck with me. And it's, why are we taking criticism from those we would never turn to for advice? We are adjusting ourselves or redefining ourselves or refusing to define ourselves or promote what we're doing or talk about what we're doing because we're afraid of someone saying, you don't have the right to this, you're not good enough to do this. But these are often the individuals that we would never even want to get advice from. So why on earth do we take critique from these individuals? Our work, our message, our art is not for them. So we need to stop worrying about them and allowing them to prevent us from actually releasing our art to the world. And I'll share a quick story. I was giving a presentation. This was maybe 10 or so years ago. I'm presenting to this audience on website strategy. And there's about 50 people in the room. And I'm giving this presentation about what a website needs, how a website needs to flow, how to guide your customers through the architecture of a website. And there's this one guy sitting in the front row and his arms are crossed and he just has this very angry look on his face. And at some point he's kind of shaking his head. Now, I have no idea who this person is, but I'm starting to conjure up all these narratives of who this person is. Maybe they also work in website architecture. Maybe they know more than me. Maybe they think I'm not qualified. Maybe they think they should be presenting here and not me, right? So the entire presentation, I'm just trying to get this guy to give me some affirmation, to give me a nod, or to be like, oh yeah, James has a good point there, to get him on my side. Okay. And I think I did at some point. Now, here's the hindsight. The hindsight is twofold. Number one, what he was upset about had nothing to do with me, even though in my head, it had everything to do with me. I found out from the event host that he was kind of a sour puss of grapes in every session he was in during this conference. He was just mad about something with the front desk. I have no idea. The point is it had nothing to do with me and I made it about me. But here's the more important part. The part where I said that I spent the presentation trying to get him on my side, because what I did by doing that was I robbed the other 49 people in that room from hearing what I actually needed to say. Those people were the people who were there for my art. Those were the people who I was creating this art or this message or this medium for, not him. And I focused on him and I tried to get him to buy into what I was doing. And I ignored the other 49 people in that room. Now, not that they knew I was ignoring them, but the energy of what we're doing matters. And that was a big lesson about why am I focusing on this one person who this is not for and ignoring the people who've actually shown up and who are here for the work or the art that I'm trying to create.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of, trying to impress the world, especially like with art. You would look at your painting and say, oh, maybe people won't like that. I should just restart or throw it away. And I saw this quote. It was like, there's billions of people in the world and you let an opinion of one person drag you down. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which, if you think about it, it's just, wow.
It's, you do a podcast. Let's just say you get 55-star reviews on your podcast and one person who you don't know gives a 1-star review. Which do you focus on? The 55-star reviews from your supportive community and listeners and subscribers and followers, or the person you don't even know who gave you a 1-star review and you're just wondering, why would they do that? You focus on the latter. We need to stop doing that because we're robbing the other people who are showing up for us.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And what creative things do you do to make your photos unique and stand out?
Early on in my photo career, I developed this saying, and the saying was to develop beyond the image. In fact, that's actually the name of my podcast, Beyond the Image. So I've really held that moniker for a number of years. But what I mean by develop beyond the image is anyone can take a good looking photo. It's not technically hard to take a good looking photo. In fact, you could take a good looking photo based off nothing other than luck. And I'll tell you, early in my career, I had a lot of photos I took that were more luck than talent. Okay. And if it's that easy to take a good looking photo, I cannot be in the business of taking photos. I have to be in the business of making images that work. There's a difference. An image that works requires that there's thought process put into the work, into how it's being used, into what would sell this work versus what would not sell this work. Okay. Now that's not to, try to sound elitist or anything like that, but to make this practical, what we would do is we would just do a lot more for our clients than other companies might do, whether it's doing location scouting, permit pulling, talent scouting, graphic design, my background working in media, so understanding what images work versus did not work. But also it meant not doing the bare minimum when it came to doing a project. And I'll give an example. Years ago, I was hired to photograph this Olympic swimmer, and we did the photo shoot. The shoot theoretically could have been done because I did everything the magazine needed for their publication. But I had this idea, this kind of crazy idea in the back of my mind. I'm like, what, I need 5 minutes. Can I do this one extra shot for you? Only take 5 minutes. And I'm like, okay, fine. Probably won't use it, but okay. And I do this quick little setup. I get the shot. And this shot not only became the lead photo for this campaign, but it ended up going on to win a bevy of awards for the next 2 years straight, and is still a cornerstone image in my portfolio. This happened after the project was done. That's an example of going beyond the image. And typically when I go into a project, I like to do, I'll call them my safe shots first. Safe shots it's what the client needs, and it's what would get the project done and be commercially viable. But every project I go in, I want to create something new, something different, something worth remarking on. I love the word remarkable because it means worthy of remarking on. I had to do this 2-part fashion shoot 2 weeks ago. I was hired. It was one client owned 2 different magazines. I had to do 2 fashion shoots in a single day. The bare minimum would have just been to make everything look very similar, because it would have saved time, it would have saved energy, and the day would have gone much faster and more effortless. But what I ended up doing was concepting out 2 contrasting styles so that each of these 2 magazines they own, even though I'm shooting them on the same day at the same location, are going to look radically different from each other. And one, we used big, open, airy, large light modifiers, giant octabanks, indirect octas, these big soft light sources with lots of sunlight and lens flare, and maybe a half stop to a stop overexposed on all the images. That was one campaign for one magazine. The other magazine, I went the exact opposite. I stopped down. I used only gridded lights, like little spotlights, little hot spotlights, and I let everything else fall super dark and super moody. So even though I shot both these ad campaigns at the exact same time, at the exact same location, they look like they were done by 2 different photographers at 2 separate locations on 2 separate days. Nothing about these, even using the same spot in the house that we were shooting at, the house we rented out for the shoot, even using the same spot, they look radically different. That's another example of going beyond the image. So it's, what can I do that takes that next step, that challenges me as an artist and challenges the project itself? One of the worst things I was ever told was an old assistant I had, this maybe 8 or 9 years ago, an old assistant I had said, James, I've been looking at your work lately and it's become very safe. And he said it in such a passive way. And what I realized is that was actually a very scary insult, because what he is saying is, you're not challenging, you're not pushing boundaries, you're not being remarkable. And if I'm going to create work that's worthy of remark, I need to push those boundaries. I need to test things. I need to try things, because what's the worst that would happen? We don't use it. That's the worst thing that happens. But I think sometimes we're either afraid to do it early on, because what if it doesn't work? If it doesn't work, that's fine. You do something else. Or B, we might get complacent by doing the same thing over and over again. We're like, oh, just do what works. And we lose that zest or that love for pushing those boundaries. So I think you need to be able to edge on both sides of that.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And I like your story about like the Olympic swimmer and how you got creative and just did what you wanted to. You didn't think about, oh, how would society think of this? You just, got creative, and people loved it because it was unique and it was different. And it went on to win many awards. And I think that's important in any field, because when you do something creative and different and unique, people will look at it and think, wow, that's different. I love it.
I did a post earlier today, and the post was, if you are not able to differentiate yourself, no one else will be able to either. And the impetus behind that is if we're just emulating everything else we see and we're not trying to create something original. And the reason we do that is because it's easy to emulate. It's easy to do what others have done, because there's a map You just follow the map. It's harder to create something that hasn't been done or that hasn't been seen. But the difference is if you just do what others have done, no one's going to notice it, because our attentions are so micro short that if you're not creating something new, something different, something worth noticing, we've already looked past it. So if you can't differentiate yourself, no one else is going to be able to differentiate you in the marketplace either.
Yeah, and I love that. That's exactly what I just said. You need to be creative and different because that's what's going to catch the attention of people.
100%.
And I see writing as an art form. So, do you feel you were able to express yourself when writing your book?
You know, writing was actually the first thing for me. I was long before photography, I was a journalist. And long before becoming a journalist, I was obsessed with creative writing. Creative writing led into journalism because I did not know creative writing could be a profession unless you were Stephen King. And I had no idea how to be Stephen King. So when I was in high school, they were like, well, and actually the reason I got into journalism was because the class I signed up for, I think it was like stage design, something completely opaque that the teacher never showed up. And because the teacher never showed up, or they forgot to hire a teacher, I don't know what happened. I had to choose a new class. And they're like, well, you have two options. It's sculpting with clay or journalism. I was like, well, I don't know what clay is. I've never touched clay. So I'm not going to be sculpting with clay. But I've written for a long time. So I guess I'll do journalism. And I went from creative writing to journalism and found a fascinating, and I became obsessed with blending creative prose with my journalistic approach. I would never say I was a great reporter because, working at a newspaper, which I did for many years, you can work in a variety of different fields. Like I worked for a while as a reporter where I reported the news. Did not like it, would not say I was good at it, definitely didn't win any awards doing it. Not that I do things for awards, but it was not something that really fueled me or gave me much passion behind it. But working as a creative writer or as an editorialist, so writing opinion columns or op-eds, or I worked a lot for the arts and entertainment section of magazines and newspapers. So everything from interviewing artists to musicians to producers to reviewing music and movies. I absolutely love that side of it because it allowed me to be really creative in my voice as a writer, but also I worked as an editor for both magazines and newspapers. I loved the creative aspect of determining like even a publication's layout, like designing what stories go where, what photos go with what stories, what does the layout look like, what headlines do we use, what fonts are we using, how are we running one story to the next story. And back in that, not to age myself, but we used to do it on these 24 by 36 inch flats. And we used to print out our stories and use these wax sticks to wax our stories onto these large flats, and then use acetate to like cut out things that get colorized. So like our workstation was 24 by 36 flats, large sheets of acetate, printed stories. And if anything didn't work, you would take an X-Acto knife and cut it out and re-glue the new thing back down. That's just how it's done. So things would end up, you've heard that expression, cutting room floor. Things would end up on the cutting room floor because you literally just cut it out with an X-Acto knife. I love that aspect of it. So this is a long road back to your question of, how do I express myself with writing? When it came, back into writing my book, which I wrote, once again, I was focused more on the outcome of what is the intention of this book. It's a business book. How do I get this message across? And I spent too much time in this perfection mode of I need to have the right title and the right chapters and the right organizations. And what helped me break through that was a rigorous discipline to write every single day. So every day I would leave my office and I would go to a coffee shop. And I went to the same coffee shop almost every day, roughly 4 to 5 days a week, for about between 4 and 6 months. And just sat and just dedicated to writing. And once I got into that, I'd order the same coffee every time. So it became this habitual routine. I just got into this flow, and any artist will be able to resonate with this state of flow where you're just in it and just the words are just coming out, even if it's stuff you don't end up using, if it's absolute crap. You're not preventing yourself from doing the work. You're not coming up with excuses like writer's block or excuses like I can't think of what to say. You're just saying, you're just writing, you're just doing. And so that's that practice of doing the work, even when you don't feel like it, even when you feel like you don't have something to say, even if you feel like, this is not going to be that good, but you still show up and do it, because that's the only way I was able to create what ended up being that book.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love how the story of the journalism thing, how teachers show up, and sometimes bad things like a teacher not showing up to a class can turn into a good thing.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. And do you see speaking as an art form, and if so, why?
Absolutely. I was so, when they survey individuals, the number one fear is public speaking. Number two is death, which means people would rather die than give a presentation. And I was one of those individuals. And the first time I had to do public speaking, I was in college. I had a professor who made me teach his classes for him as part of some upper division credits. And it terrified me. I hid behind a computer to give that, like, I didn't want people to see me. But the more I started to study the nuances of public speaking, the more I became obsessed with the art form, because it's more than the words. It's this concert between what you're saying, if you're using a slide deck, what the slides are showing, not saying, what your movement is on stage, your vocal tonality, your pacing, the way you emphasize, the way you connect with your audience. And it became, it was intoxicating. I'll be honest, and I've spoken at conferences where I can give a speech and I know, unequivocally when I can make an audience laugh, or when I can make them fall in stunned silence, when I can make the room very uncomfortable if I choose, when I could make the room cry if I choose. And it's this amazing connection, this kind of almost like a dance that you do with an audience. And it requires a tremendous amount of practice and dedication. Like I'll contrast that with, a podcast. I don't prep for a podcast. I don't prep for podcast interviews. I don't prep for the interviews that I do as a podcast host. I turn on a camera, I turn on a mic, and I have a conversation, because as a podcaster, I like that organic flow. Now, the trade-off is the pro is you have a nice organic conversation that people tune into. They feel like they're just sitting in a room with you, right? The trade-off is they don't get that manicured approach. Okay, so for podcasts, I don't want the manicured approach. I like the organic feel of it. But if I were to do that same thing on a stage in front of 500 people, my message might get lost. It might not translate, because when you have 500 people sitting in a room and they are all looking at you, they are waiting for an excuse not to pay attention. They're just waiting for an excuse not to pay attention. So you can't give that to them. You have to give them a reason to be and to stay engaged with you. I remember I was doing this presentation and I wanted to test the example of like using myself as a demonstration of how to present oneself, what our personal brands say about ourselves. So I actually forcefully messed up the presentation for the first 5 minutes and tried to make the room as uncomfortable as possible. And my assistant was in on it. All I told the event host was, this is going to get weird. Just go with it. So I go up to the front of the room. And the first thing I do is I drop all my notes. And so everyone's like, because they just see my notebook fall on the ground and all my papers just go everywhere. And then I intentionally fumble trying to pick them up. And then I of course put them in the wrong order. So I asked for the audience's patience while I reorganize my papers in front of them. Then I load the wrong slide deck on purpose, but no one knows I'm doing this on purpose. I just load the wrong slide deck. I'm like, oh my God, I loaded the wrong slides. We need to get the right slides up. Then I think the room is too bright. Can we turn the lights down a little bit? The tension in this room was so palatable. I mean, it was hilarious if it weren't so sad, right? Like, I mean, if you were in on the joke, you were laughing your ass off inside. But for everyone else in the room, like they thought I was in trouble. They thought, oh my God, I can't believe we paid to see this guy. Where did they find this guy? And they're trying to cheer me on, right? You got this, James. Don't worry. Like you can do this, right? Like it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry. You know? And then at some point I was like, okay, can we just reset? And then I, flawlessly flew right into the presentation. And then I paused and I was like, okay, which version of me left a better impression? And then the light bulb went off that they knew the whole thing was a ruse and I was kind of gaming them the whole time. But there would be an example of how you can communicate or tell a story or a message, not even through the presentation, because I didn't even start the presentation yet. I was just using my body language and my energy to relay something to this audience that they were picking up on. I wanted them to feel uncomfortable, and I made them very uncomfortable by completely destroying myself and making myself look like I had no idea what the hell I was doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. You got me. I think it's great because you got creative, and instead of just talking about here are the things you shouldn't do when you're presenting to an audience or whatever, you actually showed them. And if I was there, I'd probably just be laughing.
Yeah, it was cringeworthy. Like, I'll be honest, it was harder to do that than it was to try not to mess up. It was really difficult because you wanted to mess up, but you didn't want to crack a smile while you're doing it. You didn't want to let them know that you were doing it on purpose. It made me more nervous to do a presentation where I was forcefully trying to screw up than to do a presentation where I was trying not to screw up. And that was actually a nice confidence builder for every presentation thereafter. It became much easier because I'm like, well, at least I'm not trying to screw up, because that was way harder.
Yeah, that's awesome. And in your role as a business coach, how much of your advice to other entrepreneurs is about using their creativity in their business?
I feel like being in business, it's a combination of your left brain and your right brain. A lot think that business is a very left-brained approach where it's about the analytics and the insights and the actual marketing work that goes into it. And I truly believe, especially today, with the importance of connection and how microed everyone's attention is, the need for a right-brained approach with a left-brained mentality is so crucial, because we as consumers are hardwired for story. We as consumers are hardwired for connection. And when someone breaks through all this noise of marketing messages and sales lingo, and someone breaks through with a clear signal of communication, of story, of prose, of narrative, it comes through as such a clear, powerful signal in a sea of just marketing messages. So it's really a balance. And, being creative as an entrepreneur is essential, because it's so easy to just do what you did before. Not even looking at art, but let's just say your business is your art. How you conduct your business is your art. How you treat your clients is all your art. Industries change, technologies change, economies change. I mean, we've seen that over the last 18 months. I've seen that as a photographer. When I got in my photography career, it was, during this transition between film and digital. And they would say, all these pros would say, real professionals are never going to use digital cameras. Well, what happened? Digital won the war, and unless you were creating digital assets, you became irrelevant. So the need to change and adapt. Social media did the same thing, and they would say real clients are never going to hire professionals off social media. It's never going to happen. Well, what happened? Consumer behavior demanded to connect with and to build relationships with and to source talents using social media platforms. And I saw the same thing in the recession in 2008, where they would say, all these young professionals entering into the industry, they're ruining the industry. They're lowering their rates. They're giving away too much, but they had it wrong. It's not new people entering into an industry that's changing the industry. It's once again consumer demand. Consumers were demanding different rates. Consumers were demanding more assets. Consumers were demanding different services. And it was just new people within the industry who were willing to give it to them. Okay. And I saw the same thing last year as our economy got clobbered in throughout 2020. I saw entrepreneurs have to get very savvy and very creative and exercising that right brain to find new and innovative and many times exciting ways to connect with clients in means that they had never even fathomed before because they'd never been forced to. That's what we think about when we think about creativity in business. It's having your head on that swivel or pivoting, looking around to see what opportunities could exist that are not here currently, and are there perhaps better ways to serve our audience that we're not thinking of. I had a coaching call with one of my clients earlier today, and she owns a physical brick and mortar, and they could be looking at another shutdown in their city. I'm like, okay, let's talk about strategies should that happen, because we need to have you be prepared for this. What are ways that you could not only, you know, survive through this, but what are ways that you could thrive through this? What does that look like? And we just sat down, just did this big brainstorming session. We came up with lots of really good ideas to not just support her, but to push her into ways to run her business that she had never concepted before. But it's only into tapping that creativity do that these opportunities present themselves.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. And I think, the one thing about COVID that is good, it has got people to think how to do things differently because of all the different restrictions and all that. It gets people to think more creatively, and I still need to keep my business alive. So how do I get more creative to do that? So I think that's one of the good things that has come out of this whole lockdown stuff.
And so much of it is even just we have a certain dynamic that is very rigid in how we believe we can serve our audience. Like I used to host large scale events, and I would think there was no way to replicate what we did in our large scale events into a virtual experience, but we did it, and it did better. And it did better. That it blew my freaking mind. It did better, and it cost me 1/100th the investment that we used to do. 1/100th the investment. I was saving 99% of my budget by providing a better experience that I never considered before. Those are the opportunities that only come when we pause to say, let's erase the blueprint, let's erase the roadmap, assume we're starting from scratch. What could this look like that could behoove both the clients and us in a completely new context that we'd never thought of before?
Yeah, and that just shows that when you get creative, things can be much better.
Absolutely.
And art can be therapeutic, and it can help people through difficult situations. So has art ever helped you through a difficult situation? And if so, how?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I'm sure it has. I turn to creativity as a way to allow my brain to process what's around me. So like I'll use the example of journaling or writing. I'm able to unpack things in a much more nuanced way when I put pen to paper. And I'm still the type where I put pen to paper, and I'm a little journal addict. So I'm always purchasing new journals because like nothing excites me more than office supplies. So new pens, new journals, and I just have this collection of them. So when I put pen to paper, I'm not necessarily sure where it's going to go. I just start writing, but it's actually helped me unpack everything from unpacking dreams that were plaguing me to unpacking relationships that I had in my life, difficult situations that I was trying to navigate through. And it was only through this course of because journaling or writing can be somewhat meditative, and the longer you do it, the more you start to peel back these surface layers that are preventing your deep vision of what is this could actually be about, or what is actually the root of a stressor or a situation. So journaling's been a go-to of mine, but it's one of those things where I could look at I go on vacation and I take a little handheld walk around camera with me, and my wife and I will go on a hike, and she knows it's dangerous to go on hikes with me because I just stop for 3 hours to take a photo of of this landscape, and I have to get it just right. So she might sit for several hours while I get it just right, but I get lost in it. It's something where I will lose concept of time. Post-production photo editing is the same way for me. I have to be very careful when I'm editing work, especially creative work. And I have to set timers on my phone or on my computer to stop myself, because I'll just sit and lose a day just lost in creating. Because it does have that alluring appeal to it, and it's so easy to get lost in, whether it's the journaling or the the post production, or even just making imagery. And while my brain, like my active brain, is focused on that, whatever that task is, my subconscious can start to clear out so much of whatever else might be going through my brain.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. And that also kind of proves that you just sometimes need to do what you love and it just calms you.
Mhm.
Like sometimes I'll sit down and paint and I'll just like calm me. Or for you, it's photography. For someone else, it might be dancing or
Mhm.
writing. There's so many different things. So I think it's important. And as I was saying at the start of our conversation, that sometimes we just sit down and just let out all of our stress and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I have to give you kudos on your painting, because seeing your work and just how great it looks, I can see the energy that gets put into it. I'm nowhere near to that capacity, but I do love. I have a little, of course, I have a notebook that I like to doodle in, and even just doodling or sketching is just a way to decompress, and that'd be a good word for it, to decompress whatever is going through my mind.
Yeah, definitely. And you don't have to necessarily be good at it. Like
No.
if you like drawing and it helps you relieve stress, you do it. You don't have to be an amazing drawer or whatever. And you don't have to go and sell your work. You can just do it for yourself. No one else has to see it.
Mhm. And that's the thing. It's like, I was joking earlier about writer's block, which is a totally invented concept. You could say the same thing about drawing. I don't know what to draw. We'll just start moving the pencil around and see where it goes. Like, it doesn't have to go anywhere. Writing doesn't have to go anywhere. We have this negative, this incorrect interpretation that once we start creating something, that there has to be a conclusion to it. No, you can just turn the page and do something else. It is that simple.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And are you attracted to any particular artist?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on like what sort of art form I'm seeking out. Like if it's photography, I can say, someone like a Gregory Heisler or Frank Ockenfels, two very different photographers who create very different visuals. I can say that I love escaping into creative cinema, whether that's a director doing a very personal project, or certain cinematographers or screenwriters who I just have an affinity for. Charlie Kaufman being a screenwriter who I have a absolute fascination with the work that he creates, or even if it's just authors that I tend to really gravitate towards just because I enjoy their stuff, or musicians. I mean, all of it we kind of choose in those moments when we want to turn to it for whether it's inspiration, whether it's just pure enjoyment, or whether it's just a way to escape into something else.
Yeah, that's awesome. And are you attracted to any particular art form?
I would say probably the number one would be music. It's probably the thing I consume the most, followed closely by movies. Um, and then from there, books. Like I said, I read about a book a week, and then tailing in after. Photography is like on the scale of all the things I do consume. Photography is probably the lowest, and it's only because, like I said, it's hard for me to look at it with an eye of admiration or inspiration versus an eye of discernment. And that's more of a negative comment on myself, not a negative comment on the people creating the work.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. And my certification project is all about giving back to the community. So how do you give back to the community?
One of the things that I started to do a couple years ago was, and it's informal, but it's something I've enjoyed doing. I call it share the light. And it's me as a artist partnering with a nonprofit organization to provide photo services to help them spread their message, and or help them with whatever it is that I visually can support them with. So that's everything. I've worked with a nonprofit that helped teach kids the power of storytelling. I worked with, it was about 2 years ago, I worked with the Jewish War Veteran Association and created these series of portraits over the course of a year of Jewish war veterans from every conflict the United States has been in, dating back to World War II. And so, just spending, it was only a few minutes with each of these veterans to make a portrait, one that they can have as a gift to them, but then that this organization can use to raise awareness for their mission, for the events they're doing, for the fundraising, because they're a massive fundraising organization, for the fundraising efforts that they employ. And for me, it's one of those things where I would have paid to do it because of how much fun and how impactful and emotional, getting to spend time with these individuals was. Over 2020, we weren't able to do because so many photo shoots got shut down. But I always love, and I'm excited to bring it back, but I always love partnering with amazing nonprofits to tell stories in ways that support them, support their mission, and support the individuals that they're trying to help and support.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And how would you like people to get in touch with you?
So they can go to my website, jamespatrick.com, which has links to my podcast, my social media. If they want to follow me on Instagram, it is at jpatrickphoto.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview.
Thank you so much for having me on, and congratulations again for this campaign and this project. I love the work that you're putting into this, and it's just so inspiring to see individuals like yourself create a channel like this to communicate their message to their audience in such a powerful way. So my hat is absolutely off to you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Remember, if you want to find out more about this guest, please go to my show notes where I have all the links needed. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to my podcast series and help me by sharing it, leaving a rating, and a comment. I hope you join me on my next podcast. Bye for now.